Hi, True Crimers. So our story begins in South Salt Lake, Utah. On the afternoon, November 30th, 2010, Salt Lake County 911 received an alarming phone call. Jerry Silva was the first officer to arrive on scene. A man in the bookstore driveway flagged him down. The man said, quote, "She's back there," end quote. Officer Silva asked who the man was, and he said he was Michael. That Earl, the woman's husband, was inside of the bookstore with his deceased wife. Once more officers arrived, they cleared the main area and made their way back to the back room. When they reached the doorway, they found the body of 64-year-old Sherry Black lying on the floor with the jacket over her. The wounds on her were severe. Officer Silva said it was obvious she was deceased due to her wounds. There was a large amount of blood underneath her, and there was a large pair of scissors covered in blood next to her. Sherry Black was a wonderful mother and grandmother. Sherry married her high school sweetheart, Earl Black. The couple was married for 46 years, owned and operated a successful billiards business. For Detective Sherry loved books for decades, and Sherry loved books. She wanted a library of her own, and the books took up so much space in the house that they had to put books in their billiards business. Sherry specialized in having rare, valuable books. Earl and Michael provided their statements to police. Earl said him and employee Michael returned from working in Riverton, Utah. When the men went to Earl's home, Sherry wasn't there, so the pair went next door to the business because her car was parked in the business parking lot, and the business was right next door to the house. Earl said that they went inside the bookstore where they found Sherry in the back room. Officers asked if Earl had placed the jacket on her, and he said yes, that he did. But during the interview, Earl was crying uncontrollably, and so they had to end it there. But he did state that he called his daughter Heidi, and she was on her way. When officers questioned Michael Vasquez, he said the same thing, that he was with Earl all morning, setting up a pool table in Riverton. He said he's known the couple for over 20 years and doesn't know anyone that would want to harm them. So it was just really crazy. Said that the door was closed, but it was unlocked. And he heard Earl call out, and that's when he found Sherry, and they called 911. So police went and canvassed the neighborhood, gathered statements from neighbors, and getting any surveillance footage. The front door of the bookstore had a blood stain smeared on the handle inside the store. The common area where customers would shop was undisturbed, and in the back room by the door, several rolled up maps were by the door. Detectives found blood on those maps, and a bloody partial handprint was on the wall next to the phone. The scene in the back room was absolute horror. There was blood everywhere. Sherry was on the floor in a semi-sitting position. Her eye appeared to be bruised with possible lacerations on her face, a brown leather jacket on top of her waist. When they removed Earl's jacket, it became clear it was a sexually motivated attack. The perpetrator manipulated Sherry's clothes in a way where she was left exposed. A bloody wooden stepladder was behind her. They found bloody fingerprints and an Armani belt near Sherry's body. They removed semen along with 2 other DNA sources, one from the Armani belt. The 3 separate DNA sources was from a single male source. Most neighbors saw nothing out of the ordinary. A few witnesses reported seeing a sedan parked near the business down the street, sometimes with 4 men in there, and then one claimed that they saw a black male running between 10 to 10:30 a.m. Nearby residents had a surveillance camera that pointed westbound, pointing to the Main Street Road 700 East. So detectives asked for footage between 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. The footage confirmed Michael and Earl's story of them leaving around 9:30 a.m. and returning around 1:20 p.m. The timestamps are off by an hour due to daylight savings time. The next day they interviewed Earl. He said that Sherry had a meeting with the book vendor at 10:30 a.m. The vendor had called Earl and after hearing about Sherry, and he said that he was there at 10:30 to see Sherry, but she was not there, so he left. The detectives contacted the bookstore vendor, and he told them the same story. The man waited inside the bookstore for 45 minutes before leaving for another appointment. With the timeline the vendor provided and the medical examiners, Sherry was deceased before the man left the bookstore. The detectives asked the book vendor to come in to the station for additional questioning. The man advised them that he would have to talk to his attorneys first. So the detectives thought that was suspicious. But 2 days later, he did show up with his attorneys, and he said the same thing. And when asked if he went to the back room or if the door was open, the man said he didn't know of a back room. The investigators found his statements to be odd. However, after looking at the layout of the bookstore, you couldn't see that door from the front of the room. So his statement, panned out. He provided his clothes and DNA and handprints and everything and fingerprints, and they did not match. The medical examiner located a bite mark on Sherry and a total of 15 stab wounds. So, very brutal. So it was ruled a homicide. In January 11, 2010, 6 weeks after Sherry's murder, investigators received a tip from a confidential informant claiming that acquaintance of his bragged about killing Sherry, but they contacted him. They got his DNA. It did not match. And then 2 miles away, another woman, 18 days after Sherry's murder, 2 miles away, another woman was brutally killed, Christine Gable. The two cases had several levels of brutality and were sexually motivated crimes. However, they apprehended her killer, and his DNA did not match. Sherry's Black murder at the time was a high-profile murder in Utah. Sherry's daughter Heidi is married to Greg Miller, the CEO of Larry H. Miller, and he offered up a $50,000 reward for her. But detectives exhausted all leads. The case went cold for 6 years. When it was handed to lead detective Ben Pender, he re-interviewed everyone, and the DNA CODIS is a national DNA, so the DNA of an unknown male suspect had been entered every year for 6 years with no matches. Detective Pender contacted Pardon and gave them the DNA sample on November 30th, 2017, 7 years anniversary. Sherry, with the help of Pardon, sketches were released. Greg Miller offered a $250,000 reward. On May 1st, 2018, Detective Pender met with representative of Utah's Bureaus of Forensic Services to discuss the recent arrest of the Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo Jr., and how they used GEDmatch to identify him. GEDmatch is a database that allows users to upload their raw DNA from genetic testing companies like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA. Detective Pender provided additional DNA from the unknown suspect, and Pardon, led by C.C. Moore, in April 2019, Family Tree DNA contacted Pender and offered to run the DNA through their database. Detective traveled coast to coast gathering DNA from family members. June of 2020, best known for identifying the Golden State Killer, contacted Pender, and she began working on the case. On September 21st, 2020, Detective Pender got a call from Carol Ronick from Pardon. She said she located the grandfather and grandmother in Sacramento, California. So on September 24th, 2020, Pender flew to Cali and drove to the residence, and the guy had all daughters, but he had sexual relations with a woman in the past, and it was a son, and they found that it was Adam Antonio Durboro. And so he lived in Orem, Utah, 35 miles away from the bookstore. Detectives put him under surveillance. He went to a fast food restaurant. He ate in the parking lot and then threw out his food. They got a cup. They got his cup and his DNA matched. So finally, years later, her case was solved. He had 3 minor theft charges, but an extensive juvenile record. And October 3rd, 2020, police got him. So that's the story. Enjoy, be happy, and be kind. Until next time.